Here is a single invoice for auto parts. The amount is $8,976.24. A real order for real brake pads and oil filters sold to a real customer. And according to federal prosecutors, one company turned that one small invoice into almost $500,000 by selling it twice. Prosecutors allege Firstbrands Group sold this single invoice to one lender for $17,000, and then, 3 days later, sold the very same invoice to a different lender for $463,000. One $9,000 bill, allegedly sold for a combined $481,000. Now multiply that, prosecutors say, by thousands of invoices across 7 years until the whole reaches $2.3 billion. A quick note before we go further. Patrick James and his brother Edward James have pleaded not guilty, and all of these allegations are subject to a federal trial scheduled for July 13, 2026. Nothing here has been proven in court. A Cleveland auto parts company most people had never heard of, doing $5 billion a year in sales, supplying the brake pads and spark plugs in cars all over America. The most sophisticated financial institutions in the world, BlackRock, UBS, Jefferies, handing it billions, and allegedly never noticing the same collateral was being sold again and again. A founder accused in a civil lawsuit of quietly funding 7 homes, 17 cars, and a $500,000 celebrity chef. And one former executive who has already pleaded guilty and is now helping the government build its case. It is tempting to file this under simple theft. A greedy executive, a pile of money, a fall. But the easy answer misses the more disturbing part. Because for this to allegedly work, for the same invoice to be sold twice, for $2 billion in debt to allegedly stay hidden, it required something bigger than one man. It required a blind spot built into the modern financial system itself. And almost nobody was watching it. Patrick James founded the business in 2013, originally as Crown Group, an auto parts company based in Cleveland, Ohio. About 5 years ago, it was renamed Firstbrands Group. And if you have ever changed your oil or replaced your brakes, you have probably touched its products without knowing it. Firstbrands owned Fram oil filters, Ray Besto's brakes, Autolite spark plugs, Cardone remanufactured parts. These are the unglamorous, essential pieces of every car on the road. The company sold them to Walmart, to AutoZone, to Napa. It became a supply chain partner to Ford and to General Motors. At its peak, Firstbrands was doing roughly $5 billion in net annual sales. And here is how it grew that fast, by buying competitor after competitor, almost entirely with borrowed money. To fuel a machine like that, you need cash constantly flowing in. And that is where a normal, perfectly legal financial tool enters the story. The tool that prosecutors say was eventually turned into a weapon. It is called factoring, and it is completely ordinary. Imagine you run a parts company. You ship $1,000 of brake pads to AutoZone, and you send them an invoice. But AutoZone will not pay you for 60 or 90 days. You need the money now. So you sell that unpaid invoice to a financial firm, a factor, for, say, $950 today. The factor waits to collect the full $1,000 from AutoZone and keeps the difference. You get cash immediately. Millions of businesses use factoring every day, but it runs entirely on trust. The factor is betting that the invoice is real, that it has not already been promised to anyone else. There is no central registry where every factor can check whether a given invoice has already been sold. And prosecutors allege that Firstbrands found the gap in that trust and drove $2.3 billion straight through it. The scheme prosecutors describe has a simple name: double pledging. According to the indictment, Firstbrands pledged the same receivables, the same unpaid invoices, to multiple lenders at the same time. Each factor believed it owned a unique claim. In reality, prosecutors allege that claim had already been sold to someone else. Which brings us back to that one invoice, $8,976. Prosecutors say it was sold to the first factor inflated to $17,000, and then, 3 days later, sold again to another factor for $463,000. The same money, allegedly promised to 2 different lenders who had no way to see each other. Now picture that happening across the entire business. By the time it collapsed, prosecutors say factors were holding roughly $2.7 billion in fake accounts receivable. The indictment describes fake invoices, false financial reports, and around $2 billion in undisclosed, off-balance sheet debt. Debt the lenders allegedly never knew existed. The alleged fraud period stretches from 2018 all the way to 2025. 7 years of it. Hidden in the most boring paperwork imaginable. So where did the money allegedly go? A separate civil lawsuit, filed by Firstbrands' own new management, claims that Patrick James secretly pilfered company assets to fund what it calls a lavish lifestyle. According to that lawsuit, the spending included 7 homes and 17 cars, $3 million in rent for a New York City townhouse, $500,000 for a private celebrity chef, $150,000 for a celebrity personal trainer, $2 million in payroll for a family office, $110,000 for a single 6-week hotel stay, and $8 million routed to his son-in-law's wellness company. The lawsuit alleges the majority of these transfers happened between 2023 and 2025, the final stretch, as the hole was allegedly getting deeper. Again, these are allegations in a civil complaint, denied and unproven. But they paint the picture prosecutors want a jury to see. Then the structure cracked. There is one person in this story whose role is not in dispute, because he has admitted it. Peter Andrew Brumbergs, a former Firstbrands executive, pleaded guilty in federal court on January 26, 2026. He is cooperating with the government. His guilty plea is a fact. The trigger came in mid-2025. Firstbrands was trying to close a $6.2 billion refinancing, and it was abruptly paused for a review of the company's financial results. Lenders started looking closely. Bank of America refused to provide additional funding. South State Bank exercised set-offs, grabbing money to cover what it was owed. And once the most cautious players in the room stopped trusting the paperwork, the whole thing came apart in days. On September 28, 2025, Firstbrands filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in Texas. And the numbers inside that filing are staggering. The company listed $9.3 billion in liabilities and just $12 million in cash. A $5 billion a year company, down to $12 million. The damage spread instantly to Wall Street. Jefferies Financial Group had around $715 million of exposure. Its shares fell more than 20%. BlackRock and UBS had both helped fund the company's growth. These are some of the most sophisticated financial institutions on earth, and they were allegedly looking at the same fake paperwork as everyone else. Patrick James resigned in early October 2025. Then, on January 29, 2026, Patrick James and his brother Edward, a senior executive at the company, were arrested in Ohio. They were indicted by federal prosecutors in the Southern District of New York under U.S. Attorney Jay Clayton, with IRS criminal investigation involved. Both men pleaded not guilty. Their trial is set for July 13, 2026. Here is the part the headlines skip. The fatal flaw was not one man's greed. The fatal flaw was a system that could not see itself. Factoring works on a simple assumption that an invoice can only be sold once. But there is no shared ledger, no central registry, where every lender can check whether a receivable has already been pledged somewhere else. In the public markets, with audits and disclosure and regulators, that gap gets caught. But Firstbrands was a private company, financed in the booming, opaque world of private credit, where money chases yield faster than anyone verifies the collateral underneath it. Prosecutors allege that Firstbrands didn't break the system with some brilliant hack. It allegedly just exploited the fact that nobody was looking at the same picture. The same invoice could be sold again and again precisely because no single lender could ever see all the others. That is not a flaw in one company. That is a flaw in how trillions of dollars now move. So here's what to watch for when this goes to trial in July. The question is not just whether two brothers are guilty. It is whether the institutions that handed over billions will admit how little they actually verified. A court-appointed examiner, with a $7 million budget, is already digging through the wreckage. And the lesson for anyone who builds or invests in anything is brutally simple. When the paperwork is boring enough and the money is flowing fast enough, trust me, can hide a $2 billion hole for 7 years. Verification is not bureaucracy. Verification is the only thing standing between a working market and a magic trick. If you want to see this exact disease in a different costume, a financial empire built on the same supply chain finance paperwork, collapsing into the same kind of black hole, Watch our breakdown of Greensill Capital, the firm that pulled a former British Prime Minister down with it. Same blind spot, same trust, different ending. The link is on screen now.